Hey there crew, Brandon here. On today's Masks Monday, we're going to be talking about how to tune your table by picking playbooks carefully. It's also GM's day today, so I do want to just say that this video is a little bit GM centric. I try to make sure that the videos have kind of a spread of things for players and GMs, but this one is maybe a little bit more specific. On the other hand, if you do know these tips as a player, it can be helpful if the GM doesn't, because you can help fine-tune the game even from the player side of things. So you've decided you're playing Masks, you know you're going to be going with this crew, you know what's going on, right? But you don't necessarily know yet what story you're going to tell. If you're with your general play group that meets on a regular basis or meets sporadically, it kind of doesn't matter yet. You can play whatever is interesting to the table. It might be that you're able to just kind of throw things together, put a bunch of playbooks down and work that out, but it also can be useful to sit down and have the conversation ahead of time. If you know that every player wants to play a dark, gritty, street-level game, you can make sure that your game is doing that right from step one, and that will make everything just move so much smoother and cleaner, and it'll make your story that much better. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of really cool playbooks, and it is really tempting to just play all of them and have them all on the table and just let everybody choose whatever they'd like. And that's a totally legitimate way to play Masks. There's nothing wrong with going, hey, we'll structure our story around what the players choose. And that really works well for most tables. As a matter of fact, that's how Protean City has been set up, that's how Latin Explosion is set up, and that's how pretty much every game that I've run in Masks has been done. There is just one problem with it. Because there's a huge variety of playbooks and those playbooks are all really different from each other, you can really change the tone of your game by choosing the wrong set of playbooks. I was hanging out with a couple people and decided to do just like a little tiny pickup game of Masks. We threw some playbooks down, people grabbed them, we were going. Just really going for the rawest pick up and play vibe we possibly could. We wanted kind of a happy story, like just a little bit of like, fun superhero action. Instead, we got immediately into really sad topics and a view into horrible teenage experience. How did that happen? Well, we had at our table The Doomed, The Delinquent, and The Transformed. All three of those playbooks are about being disconnected from people and about trying to find your place in ways that aren't necessarily happy and come with a whole bunch of judgment. And the GM moves for those playbooks are so wonderfully fine-tuned that they hit that really quickly. Like we weren't an hour and a half into play before these players were feeling hated and feared, and it was awesome. But it was also sad, and it wasn't really what we were going for. I, as the GM, have the tool of playbook pruning, and I didn't use it, which meant we got a sad game when we wanted a happy one. Between the original book and other publications from Magpie Games, Masks has 20 playbooks. Even assuming that you haven't picked up any new ones, that's an overwhelming amount of things to choose from. Pruning that list means that you'll hit the ground a little bit faster, and you won't have to have conversations of, oh, does the Doomed make sense if we're only playing for one session? Hint, it doesn't. Let's start there. One-shot versus campaign. Most PBTA games, and actually probably most RPGs in general, aren't played as campaigns. They're played as one-shots. People do a single session, and then people get busy, and it falls apart. So why would we always assume that we're playing for a campaign? So let's start with pruning for a one-shot. We don't want playbooks that require a lot of build-up in order for their stories to become cool. There's plenty of playbooks that are really, really cool from the get-go, and don't need to have that longer arc in order to start really showing off their best features. There's two sets of playbooks that I take out for one-shot play. One is the playbooks that their entire feature and deal is a long-term story, and the other is playbooks that their relationships change dramatically through play. For that first group, I'm talking about the Doomed, the Innocent, the Newborn, and the Joined. All of them have playbook features that really change over time and only change over time. The Innocent's best features, and frankly, the Innocent is my favorite playbook, only come into play when you've been at it long enough to start making really bad mistakes. The Doomed only hits their doom when a lot of time has gone by. Those just don't work if you're only doing one session. So, cut them. The other ones that I would cut are the ones whose relationships change in a dramatic way from like session 1 to session 3. For that, I'd be talking about the Arbinger, the Nomad, the Scion, and the Reformed. These are playbooks that every session get more interesting in really dramatic ways, but you could kind of get away with. I say cut them because you've still got like another 15 playbooks to pick from. And when you do get to play a Scion and get to see the moments where the heroes start affirming them and they start becoming a hero in the city, it's such a good moment. Don't shortcut that. Don't try to fit it into a single session. It won't fit and it won't work. There's a reason it's written the way it is. Clear your tables. Don't have any playbooks. It's going to be amazing. I'd also cut the brain. It's not as dependent on long-term play, but unless your story is about their problem, it won't come up. So, cut it. The next kind of play I want to talk about is something I call neighborhood play. This tends to be something like The Defenders or Kamala Khan, that really the setting that they're in is extremely important. Daredevil doesn't work as well outside of Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen is like a character in this story. It matters. Your relationship to Hell's Kitchen matters. In any case, there's playbooks that just won't fit because they don't have ties to the neighborhood. In these stories, your character's relationships with the guy who runs the bodega down the street is every bit as important as their powers, because that's what grounds the entire thing. For that, I'd cut out anything that can't be from the neighborhood that you're in, or isn't meaningfully a part of the neighborhood that you're in. I know that sometimes it can be tempting to have someone who doesn't have the connection, but like for me, I just want everybody to be from there and connected to there and living in it, because then every single scene can be about those connections to the neighborhood. So what do we cut? Anything that can't be from the neighborhood in a long-term meaningful way. The Nomad's kind of an obvious one, but I'd also include the Arbinger and the Newborn. Neither of them have enough connection to the current time in order to really make sense of it. They don't have 16 to 20 years of experience being a part of this place. The Bull is kind of an edge case. If they've really integrated, I'd allow it, but I'd really want to see that integration tied into the character hard. If they just got back to the mundane world, no thanks. The Innocent I'd allow in certain circumstances. That's probably just because I'm biased and love the Innocent so much. It's probably better to pull it. Or, if you don't, you better make sure that character is so grounded, both in their original time and in their dark present, with the neighborhood. Also, this isn't a playbook pruning thing, but if you then set up and someone says, "Oh yeah, I just moved to town a week ago," ask them why, because that matters too. Another kind of story that I really like is street level stories, which sounds an awful lot like neighborhood stories, and it can be, but it isn't necessarily. What I'm talking about here is heroes that don't have a lot of power. When you have these low power heroes that have just like a little bit going on, it means you can play in a very specific space of people that are just barely making it. This could be something like Kick-Ass, where you don't have any powers, or Hawkeye, where you don't have any powers, or it could be something that you're just not the super strongest. You're not Jean Grey, right? Because of the way that Masks handles character powers, it isn't necessarily super easy to make sure that happens, but more or less just look at that weirdness thermometer and just turn it down a little bit. The Nova, out. The Doomed, probably out. The Legacy, way less powerful than it often is. And the super strange stuff, the Outsider, the Newborn, the Arbinger, the Nomad, the Innocent, take them out too. And sorry, the Star, you don't make the cut this time. If we're street level and we're just trying to live day to day, your 6.8 Instagram followers just don't make the cut. Hashtag, thank you. Next. When your players do make their characters, encourage them to ground their powers. Talk about where the limits of their powers are. If things are getting really, really weird, it's not going to feel street level anymore. There's also a part of me that goes for the extreme street level, where you say, hey, no super weird powers. Cut everything down. Make it so that your characters are martial artists out in the street. And that'll make a really cool, rad story. It's really nice being able to say, just like, yeah, this is people that are just out there fighting the good fight. In that case, I think it isn't a matter of cutting out a whole bunch of playbooks. It's more a matter of choosing your powers carefully. Just talk with your group ahead of time. I wasn't going to include this next part, but I'm a little bit afraid that Brennan Conway will see this video and die inside if I don't talk about cosmic level play. You'd think that pretty much everything goes, and I'm actually going to go ahead and say that, yeah, pretty much anything goes, with one or two little quick exceptions. The Janus is tied in with having mundane obligations. And if you're off in space doing super, super rad stuff, that's kind of a letdown. Like, are your parents not going to notice that you've been gone for a month and a half? Are your obligations really tying in if you can just leave your part-time job for the summer? I don't know. It seems like it doesn't fit. So let's pull it. Additionally, the Protege and the Legacy only really work if their Legacy and Protege are also huge, cosmic, amazing, high-level things. You can be the next Space Fellow, you can't be the next Daredevil. Why did I use Daredevil as a real example and Space Fellow as a fake one? Bad video making, Brandon. Additionally, if your entire team is nomads, the nomad doesn't make a lot of sense. And unless your outsider is really outside, cut it. This was a bigger category than I realized. Apart from that, as far as I'm concerned, everything goes. All the rest of the playbooks will make a lot of sense, just amp up their power. Star-Lord could totally be a beacon with no powers. That makes him quite a bit higher level than a lot of other beacons, but compared to the rest of the Guardians, he's got nothing. On the other side of things, your Nova better be pretty big when they've got all of space to deal with. I've seen some people also suggest that the Soldier doesn't work for cosmic level stories, but I think the Nova Corps would disagree with you. There's also the issue that I first stumbled upon that got me interested in the idea of pruning playbooks. The sad playbooks versus the happy playbooks. Now, I love me a sad superhero story, and all of the playbooks can do that, but there's some that are really kind of difficult to make not hit that sadness eventually. The Doomed is the really obvious one. They're going to be doomed. Eventually, that's going to get real sad. But there's definitely some others as well that tend to veer in that direction. Because of the inherent traits of being feared and hated and having no place to fit in, the Transformed tends to veer a little sad. Outsiders can be weird and different also, but that tends to be in a way that's more acceptable to the general public, so that is less likely to veer totally sad in your very first session. Characters that have built-in sad starting points also tend to eventually end up in that sadness. The Bull, the Reformed, and the Scion all have a really intense connection to what is probably an evil organization of some kind. And while it's possible to just go punch it and have a really fun, good time, it's likely you're going to be going into some discussions of that dark past and how sad and traumatic it probably has been. So if you're just looking for a rollicking good time, pull 'em. Oh, The Innocent is kind of the same thing. That playbook is maybe the saddest playbook. It's awesome. I love it. It is so good. Why am I pulling my favorite playbook out of all of these different settings? Because it requires a specific set of circumstances in order to really work well. And that's okay. It's okay to have a playbook that works well in certain ways and doesn't. The Joined is really rad. And honestly, you need a certain kind of table to make it work. And that's also okay. On the flip side of that, if you are looking for a sad game, definitely make sure to include some of those characters. You can have a really cool, gritty set of superheroes by really playing into the ones that tend to be a little more sad. The Transformed is great for that. Delinquent, Reformed, Scion. Hey, you've got a team of that. You've got a whole team with connections to being scary. And that's really cool. It lets you play in a world that has less appreciation for superheroes. That rocks. That's an awesome way to play. Just make sure the players are on board for it, because, yeah, this is going to go a little dark. On the other hand, with certain other tables, you might not want to have playbooks that are a little similar. The Delinquent, the Reformed, and the Scion all have some definite shared DNA, as do the Outsider and the Nomad. They'll differentiate each other, sure, but just make sure that people know that they're going to be telling some similar stories on their quest to getting there. The last thing I want to hit on is player versus player conflict. This is less about pruning the playbooks and more about being a little careful about what playbooks are being chosen. But if you have playbooks that tend to be a little bit more rebellious and playbooks that tend to be a little bit more, well, in comic terms, Boy Scout, then you're going to end up with an additional layer of player drama and conflict in the game. The legacy and the triangle of delinquent characters I just talked about kind of go hand in hand with that. Those two together make sure you're going to have a rough time, and that's great if that's what you're going for. The Bull also distinctly requires player versus player conflict. It demands it. That rival is going to show up and be important. On the other hand, if you want a more tightly knit crew, then having something like the Beacon that ties everybody together, or the Joined that really obviously care about each other a lot, is a good way to have some additional cement in your team. The Nomad is another one that could potentially cause a lot of player versus player drama, just because they don't want to have the same level of connection as other players. And that's also okay. That's what the Nomad's all about. That's rad. If that's what your table wants, give that to your table. So whatever story you're trying to tell, be sure to just take a look at what playbooks you're making available to your players before any decisions get made. Make sure that the players are on the same page as you also, because maybe they want something really specific out of the game, and not having that on the table should be a red flag that you're maybe not trying to play the same story. That's one of those things where you talk about it as a team, because that's how you get forward and move on from it. None of these rules are set in stone. You can play a cosmic story with a Janus. It's just going to be a little different. A Nova Core Janus could actually be kind of cool. So, here's my challenge to you, GM to GM on GM's Day. Next time you're setting up a table, don't put all 20 playbooks down. Make some kind of choice, pull some of them, and have that conversation. Build that story and see how it changes how your comic evolves. If you have had successes or tribulations from pruning playbooks, let me know. This goes way beyond masks and works for really any game that uses a playbook or class structure. Hit me up in the comments or send me a tweet on Dr. Captain Cobalt. If you want more Masks Monday content, and frankly a lot more masks, I love masks, be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. That doesn't just help me with the ratings, it helps you to get more mask content too. And if you really want to stay up to date, ring that bell. I'm going to be back a little bit later this week with some information about Fan Favorite, a mask zine that's kickstarting right now. A link to it will be down in the description. That also comes with a couple of additional playbooks. I have thoughts on how they slot in, but I don't want to get into them right now because doing that kind of dooms me to start doing 20, 30, 40-minute videos, which is just not kind of what I'm going for here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on pruning playbooks in Masks and every other game you play. So, until next time, keep doing good in a world that hates and fears you. Bye, folks.